The 2025 NHL Draft is come and gone, and the Carolina Hurricanes have restocked their prospect pool with 7 more players, a lot of Russians, a couple Swedes, and even an American. Now, with all that being said, what do the Hurricanes look like right now post-draft with their 7 new faces to the franchise?
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers, also the co-host of the Search Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Got a fun Monday episode for you guys as we get to recap the 2025 NHL Upper Deck Entry Draft for your Carolina Hurricanes, look over how they were able to get all 7 of their picks and who they even took in the draft as well. Who could possibly be most impactful with a lot of these guys possibly not coming over for a few seasons, but there are a lot of skill sets to be excited for. And that being said, with the guys coming to development camp next week, who am I excited for the most, or who people should be really excited for the most? But before we jump into everything on today's episode, the episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, when it came to the NHL draft, of course, we all know how long round 1 was, where it was basically 4.5 hours of a decentralized slog of a draft with a lot of teams being in their home cities, technical difficulties and stuff like that. Just way too much long in between picks. I feel like it just took forever. Thankfully, day 2 wasn't as bad. It was 5 hours, but you're talking rounds 2 through 7. So that's kind of a little bit understandable. We're going through the rest of the picks. But overall, Monday was definitely a slog of it. Of course, as everyone knows, the Hurricanes held the 28th overall pick and decided to trade away 4 hours into the draft. So, at no surprise, Carolina does it again, and this time they do it with the Chicago Blackhawks once again, and they're able to get the 34th and the 62nd. Of course, then we all know on day 2, they traded the 34th overall pick and the 189th that, later in the draft as well to get Pittsburgh's 41st overall and the Montreal second in 49. So there were some additions. So the Hurricanes went from having 0 second rounders to 4 second round picks, looking at picks 41, 49, and, going to the 3 second rounders from 41 to 39 to 62. Then, of course, getting 67 and 87 in round 3, and then 183 and 221. Now, looking at the draft, of course, the Hurricanes did take Semyon Frolov out of Spartak Moscow, their only netminder of the draft, but really awesome. It's a great pickup for them. He was the second-ranked goalie in terms of international goaltenders by NHL Central Scouting. Very good pickup there. Last year for Spartak Moscow in the MHL was a 9-2-2 with a 915 save percentage and a 205 goals against with 2 shutouts in 13 games. Not a bad pickup. Really good side-to-side lateral movement. Someone who is very athletic, very quick as well. Doesn't have the flux, and pretty overall for guys 6'3", in the fact that he finds a way to seal himself to the ice, put himself into a good spot, and gives the Hurricanes another good Russian goaltender who they hope to be a impactful guy later on in the future. Of course, he is going to go back to Spartak Moscow next year, so it's probably going to be a few years before we even see him come over to North America, but at least that the goalie pipeline is getting a little bit stronger, and of course the Hurricanes love their Russians. Now, their first non-Russian of the draft was Charlie Serrato out of Penn State, the lone American from Fallston, Maryland, and of course he's a 6'190" left shot center, definitely considered a two-way And in terms of North American skaters, the NHL Central Draft ranked him as 110. And the thing is, he's really good at engaging opponents. So he's really good on the defensive side of things, knows how to clamp down, knows how to drive them wide and stuff like that. But too, his offensive mindedness really works in his favor, knows how to attack off the rush, and knows how to charge down the wing and find a way to cut inside and even set up cutbacks on setting up passes for guys who are streaking into the zone. He had a pretty good career in the USA show with the Youngstown Phantoms in his last year. Down there, he had 12 goals, 50 points in 45 games, was a +3. Did have a lot of penalty minutes, though, 71 in that season with the Phantoms. But then last year at Penn State, he was second on the team in points with 42, only behind the Hobie Baker finalist and his teammate, but he did have 15 goals in 38 games for a +16. So overall, not bad to get a guy like that in Serato where they did. Really fantastic selection by that because of the fact that you got him where they did. Now, moving on later into the second round, of course, this was their last pick of the round, but they got the guy who a lot of people thought were going to be someone of a first rounder, a late first round. Everyone thought he was going to go there, but instead he somehow falls to 62, which is the original pick that the Hurricanes got from Chicago. And they got Ivan Rybkin out of the Muskegon Lumberjacks, who just won the Clark Cup last year. He had 19 goals and 30 points last year in 27 games. And looking at just where he was overall, though, he was ranked pretty highly by when it comes to the central scouting. He was 35th among international skaters. So for the fact they were able to get him at the spot they did, it was pretty solid overall. And it makes you feel really good for the fact that you've got a guy who does have some upside, did have a fall off compared to a lot of people thought he was going to have. So for the fact that Carolina got him there was pretty surprisingly, but it did work itself out in the end to where they got now themselves another good center. And Rybkin, going into the third round, this is a pick that, surprised a lot of people because the fact that the Carolina Hurricanes were able to, trade, farther up into the draft to go get this guy. And that's Kerman Limatov out of Dynamo Moscow, left shot defenseman. He had 8 goals and 23 points in 46 games last year for the MHK, Spartak Moscow team, or, for Dynamo, and played in the MHL last season. And even in the playoffs, how about 2 goals and 5 points? And the thing that I really like about this kid, 6'4", 190. So, of course, he could add some weight to himself, but 6'4", very, very solid as well. And the fact he was also ranked 9th among international skaters by NHL Central Scouting. So it was very interesting how the Hurricanes were able to go and get him where they did in the draft. As the 67th overall, and of course, they were able to trade up from the Kings to go get that pick. Moving later on to the third round, 20 picks later, of course, this is the one they really got from Tampa. Another right shot defenseman. This one's from Dynamo St. Petersburg, not to be confused with Dynamo Moscow, but this is Dynamo St. Petersburg right shot defenseman Roman Basov. 2 goals, 11 points in 41 MHL games for Dynamo St. Petersburg's junior team last year. And he was ranked 3rd among blue liners in goals, which was tied, and also assists and in points. And overall, he tied for 11th in the MHL in points among defensemen under 18 years old. And supposedly he's supposed to go back there next season as well. And he was also ranked 34th among international skaters by NHL Central Scouting. So overall, so far, the Hurricanes are getting a lot of guys who are ranked pretty decently when it comes to how the NHL Central Scouting kind of viewed them. At that point, the Hurricanes had 10 Russians, which is, a lot for one team to have that many guys. I know the NHL Network guys on day 2 are kind of worried about, is that possible to have that many guys for the Carolina Hurricanes, especially with the fact that they're all Russians, what's going to happen by signing them and all this other stuff. Well, that's just the thing. It's the Hurricanes aren't afraid to go there, while a lot of other teams are afraid to go with the Russians. Carolina's proven over the last 2 drafts, they've drafted 10 Russian guys, and they're definitely not afraid to do that. Now, that was the last run of the Russians, because then waiting 2 hours later in round 6 at 183, they went and got Vigo Nordland out of Skefleta AIK junior team, where he had 24 goals and 49 points in 40 games last year as the alternate captain for Skellefteå AIK's team in the Junior 20 National League, which is their top junior league over there in Sweden. And even in the playoffs, how about 6 goals in 12 points? You'd love to see that in 6 playoff games. He also, led the club in goals, in points, and for the fact he was also ranked second in assists and finished 8th among all league skaters in goals in the regular season. Not bad at all when it comes to looking at that. And the thing, too, is per NHL Central Scouting, he was only ranked 26 among international skaters. So the Hurricanes, even later in those rounds, we're looking at round 6 and all that, they're still getting guys who are ranked pretty high on the NHL Central Scouting boards. And the fact that they got their, they drafted a Swede for the first time in a while, and it's a left winger, so not bad at all things considered. And then this one I was really happy about, because I did, I've talked about him with some articles with the Hockey Rays, and also here a little bit too, is their last pick of the draft at 221 in round 7, the fourth to last pick. They got Philip Ekberg of the Ottawa 67s out of the Ontario Hockey League. 16 goals, 45 points in 53 games last year with the 67th. Ranked 4th among club skaters in points per game at .85. And the thing, too, is you look at how he did last year in the World Juniors. How about for the fact that the 2025 U18s, he had a record 18 points with 10 goals in that one as well in 7 games, leading everyone in the tournament in goals and points. And, of course, that helps Sweden get the silver medal. And the thing, too, is with him, when you come to Phil Beckberg, and this is something that was really surprising, was a lot of people have viewed more a late second, somewhere in the 3rd round pickup in this draft, but somehow that 5'10", 170 skater managed to go all the way to 221 for the Hurricanes. The thing is, he was ranked 170 elite. Even Ian Kennedy put him at 80. So that's kind of a really surprising thing, that the fact that he dropped so far back, but hey, the Hurricanes picked him up, and I think he's a really great, left winger, right winger that the Hurricanes will love to have in the future. So looking at this draft, not bad at all if you're looking at the Hurricanes. They got a couple Swedes, got 4 Russians, and they picked up an American. And of course, like I said, they picked up, a goaltender, 2 centers, a couple defensemen, and they picked up 2 wingers. So all in all, for the Hurricanes to go and trade back a couple times, trade up even once to go and still get the Russians they really like, but also picked up a couple speedy two-way Swedes and an American center. Not bad, all things considered. That being said, who I think could be the most impactful? Of course, we're talking years years down the line. Who really knows? But who could be that guy that could really put himself into a good spot down the road for the Hurricanes in the future? So stick around, and we'll talk about that here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. And it's super easy to use with a lot of fast payouts, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Even if you get same-game parlays or just watching the bet right into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you are part of the action. So if you're new to FanDuel, well, new customers can get $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, looking at guys who could be really impactful for the Carolina Hurricanes, of course, like I said, it varies very much differently, because you look at a guy like Semyon Frolov, who's signed for a good little while over in Spartak Moscow. Goalies take a little while to develop. How's he going to play? Charlie Serrato, with Penn State, how's his development going to play on stuff like that too. And I think there's looking at guys like Philip Ekberg, even looking even at the defensemen in Viggo Nordland, are these guys going to be staying over in their respective countries? And I think for the most part, most of them are going to be doing that. I know with Charlie Serrato, he is going back to Penn State next season after having 15 goals and 42 points last year. He will be his sophomore season over there in Penn State. Do we see him coming before that? Who's really to say? But I think the fact that you're looking at a two-way center, 6'1", 190, 20 years old, I think there is some potential there for him to, keep improving on his play style. I know he had 50 points 2 seasons ago in Youngstown, and then, like I said, last year with Penn State having 42. Does have a good plus minus. It's just trying to, knock down the penalty minutes. Because before, going to Youngstown, he was about 22, 14 in that range. But 71 in Youngstown, 58 in Penn State. There is that line of being a guy who can be aggressive, but it's making sure you're not taking yourself completely out of the games. I think that's where they're really going to have to watch out for stuff like that. But I think Charlie Serrato could be someone to keep an eye on, especially in the Big Ten next year, because he was a Big Ten, freshman finalist. So that's someone to really keep an eye on. But just got to look at where he is in terms of just making sure he's not going too far and putting himself out of, competition of being able to be on the ice a lot more. But I like Charlie Serrato. I think he could do something. Be interesting to see how he does at Penn State, who is a program that is definitely on the rise. Then, of course, everyone is really excited about Ivan Rivkin. He did last year for the fact that he went through multiple different teams and trying to find where a good fit for him would be. And I think it got to the point where he was able to put himself in a good spot with the Muskegon Lumberjacks last year in the USHL. Like I said, they went on to win the Clark Cup. And, he's definitely considered a heavy shooter, a good playmaker, and very, very offensive. And this is something that you look at Serrato and his size, but this is what you're looking at Ivan Rivkin. This dude is built like a fuck. He knows how to find a way to thread a needle when shooting the puck, and he has a hammer of a shot. And the fact, too, is he's good at shooting, he's good at passing, and also good at hitting. And the fact, too, is that he's got some really good stick handling, which is kind of surprising, and, being able to do that while on the rush to get a shot off. And for the fact that he was ranked 35th by North American, for North American skaters by Central Scouting is crazy. And even, too, Craig Buttonham at 24, Bob McKenzie had him at 41, Ian Kennedy at 22. Not Ian Kennedy, but just the fact that you have a guy who was supposed to go in the first round and the Hurricanes took him at 62 is very, very big. And the fact that you look at it last year, 19 goals, 30 points in 27 games, and even in the playoffs, look at a guy who had 7 goals, 16 points in 14 games. However, this is something to keep an eye on, though. 70 penalty minutes in the regular season, 30 penalty minutes in the playoffs with Muskegon. So while he is someone who does put up points, because even for Dynamo Moscow back in 23-24, he did have 58 points, 24 goals in 44 games. And he was a plus 32 the year, did have 40 penalty minutes as well. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on for a guy who does rack up a lot of penalty minutes. But I guess it's that kind of that weird in-between of someone who's really violent when it comes to, throwing hits. Not violent in a bad way, but it's like an Andrei Svechnikov where if he hits someone, he might get penalty. He might get called for it. So that's something to keep an eye on. But I know a lot of people were excited about Ivan Rivkin. And the fact that he dropped that far was very, very huge. Now, another, rush we got to take a look at is Kerbin Limatov. And I think that's where I think a lot of other people are excited for this guy. And you got to love his confidence, too. Because when he was talking to media, they asked him, who does he think is the best defenseman right now that's going to be in the NHL? And he's like, me in 5 years. That is some very big confidence in a guy like him. And the fact that he was ranked 9th by your NHL Central Scouting for European skaters, and the fact that you're looking at a guy who's 6'4", 190, a left shot defenseman, but for his size, he's big, he mobiles, plays aggressively on both sides of the ice, and the fact that he's somehow fluid on his skating. It's not the prettiest of skating, he's not the fastest guy, but his long strides really help him be able to get into the depth. Going back to his same club of Dynamo Moscow next year, is really going to set himself up to be a really good player, and I'm very excited to see what he can do. But for the fact that they got a defenseman who's very defensively minded, but can also play good on both sides, I think that's going to be really, really exciting for the Carolina Hurricanes. Now they're getting a good stay-at-home defenseman, but someone who's tall, big, and be able to do what he can do on the ice. Another player, two more we're going to talk. Left wing, he is 5'9", 168, but he's considered a speedster who's a very good dangler when it comes to moving the puck on his stick and be able to create on the rushes. And just for the fact that he's fast. He's a fast hands guy, a elusive skater, can definitely beat guys on one-on-one and create chances for himself. Last year, like I said, in the junior 20 league, Scafetta, 24 goals, 49 points in 40 games, was a +6. And like I said, 12 points in 6 games in the playoffs as well. Did have some time with the top club in the SHL, which is really cool to see. He is technically going to be on loan at IK Oskarshamn in the Hockey Evaskusen League. So that should be really exciting to see how he does in that league next year. But someone to really keep an eye on when it comes to the Swedes. I'm really excited to see what he can do. Now, the last guy we're going to be talking about, and this is the one that I was, really excited about, and the fact that the Hurricanes were able to get him was Philip Ekberg of the Ottawa 67s. I thought he was going to go third round, maybe third or fourth round at the latest. But the fact that he dropped all 70 left winger, but he's a cerebral tactician who's very good offensively and is someone who's a really good playmaker. Yes, he was ranked 178th for North American skaters, but when you look at guys like from Flow Hockey of Chris Pierce putting him at 83, Elite Prospects had him at 76. Overall condensed rankings had him 63rd. Even Daily Faceoff had him at 68. The fact that he dropped back this far was very huge, but last year with Ottawa, 16 goals, 45 points in 53 games. But the thing, too, is overall for the U18 Sweden team, he had 27 points in 19 games, and that's coming off of 10 goals, 18 points, and having a +6 in 7 games for the World Junior team in Sweden where he got a silver. That is a very huge pickup for the Hurricanes to where you get a guy who dropped 4 rounds, and that's because there was a run of bigger guys going in this draft. I think that's why you saw a lot of guys who were supposed to go a lot sooner drop farther, because a lot of teams are trying to implement what the Florida Panthers do, because this is a copycat league. And I think a lot of teams are trying to go for what the Panthers are doing. So that's why you saw a lot of guys who were supposed to go earlier in the draft fall back farther. So that's why Ekberg fell back 4 rounds to Hurricanes at 221. And I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks. They need to go after this guy. And the fact that he took him, a great guy who can play on either side of the wing, someone who's very smart, has really good touch, and I think would really fit the system well. So that is another guy that is going to be really impactful, hopefully, for the Hurricanes moving forward. So that being said, who should fans be excited for, when it comes up to this upcoming, season over, if it's, here in North America or over there in Europe as well? Who should Hurricanes fans be excited about? Stick around. We'll talk about it here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So we talk about the draft overall, who they got, why people should be excited for these guys, where they were kind of, ranked in terms of central scouting, who could possibly be the more impactful guys moving down the road. And I know we talked about a lot about them kind of overall, but I think for the fact that the Hurricanes once again hit very well on guys who could have some impact in the future. It just depends on where their development is over the next few seasons, especially over there in Europe, because there's a lot of guys who are 18, 19, 20 years old. There's going to be a few seasons before we see them get there, but it's definitely a lot of excitement going around when it comes to these guys that the Hurricanes picked in the 2025 draft. That being said, Who do I think, who I'm excited for and who I think other fans should definitely be excited about? Well, obviously, I know a lot of people are going to love the Russian goalies, especially Simon Frolov. I'm really curious to see what he does next year, going back to Spartak Moscow. Of course, how's Charlie Serrato going to be at Penn State in his sophomore year after having a big rookie season in the Big Ten last year with 42 points in 38 games? How is he going to be in terms of that? I know for certain that a lot of people are going to be excited for Ivan Rybkin. Of course, where is he going to be next year after playing for Muskegon? Where does he go from there? Because he's already in North America, first time over here. Did pretty well, things considered, and the fact that he was over a point per game guy in the regular season of the USHL and had a very good playoff as well, where he got 7 goals, 16 points in 14 games. Where does he go from there after getting the USHL title? I think that's someone a lot of people are going to be excited for because, like I said, 5'11", 209. This guy's built like a fire hydrant, like a brick house. Where does his development go past here, and where does his season look like next year? Does he go to Chicago? Does he stay in the USHL? How does all that play out? I wouldn't be surprised if you possibly see him with the Chicago Wolves next year, but there's a possibility it could be looking more of like a USHL route still again, or ECHL, or however it plays out. So who really knows when it comes to that? But I know it has been confirmed that all of these guys that were drafted are going to the development camp. So that's going to be really exciting to see how these guys do at camp. I know another one a lot of people are excited for, Kerben Leiftoff. I know he's going back over there doing his thing with Dynamo Moscow, but another guy that's going to be really exciting to keep an eye on as well. Like I said, 6'4", 190, a very fluid skater. I'm really excited to see what he can do, and it should be very exciting to overall see what Leiftoff could do in his development. Of course, defense takes a little bit longer when you're talking a guy who's that tall and can still put on some more weight. Even the fact he's only around that his age of being 18, that is very crazy to think about. But definitely excited to see what he can do. And obviously, you could also look at Roman Bosov. How's he going to be with Dynamo St. Petersburg next year as well? Like I said, he's also another tall guy, 6'5", 190. The Hurricanes got a lot of tall defensemen at 18. Like I said, Leiftoff, 6'4", 190. And Roman Bosov, 6'5", 190. That is some big boys. Obviously, like I said, too, you look at Serrata, you look at Rybkin. Don't overlook Viggo Nordlund out of Sweden next year. Going back over, he's going to be playing in the a different league over there in Sweden, but someone who I think would be really big after having a season in the top junior league. So he's going to go to the next. He's going to be not the highest tier of Sweden hockey, but right in that next level, over there as well. But not bad when you have 24 goals, 49 points in 40 games in the junior 20 league. And then, of course, my last guy who, like I said, I've already talked about him enough on this show, but got to mention it again. You got to look at Philip Ekberg, after having 44 points in the junior 20 league, back in 22 through 24 as well. That's very huge. And the fact, like I said, had a very good season over there for the Ottawa 67s in the Ontario Hockey League, of course. I think that's where you're probably going to see him back once again, because this was his first time over here in North America. I would not be surprised if they feel like that he might be going back to Ottawa again. It all just depends on how everything plays out in terms of overagers and stuff like that. This could be a situation where does he go back over to Sweden, or does he stay in North America in a different aspect? I wouldn't be surprised if they're like, hey, let's just put you in Chicago, see how you do, depending on how it all plays out with him going back to the CHL, or does he go to college, or how does that work out? But I think Philip Ekberg and what he can do, the fact you got a third round guy in round 7, I think that's something that should be very exciting for Hurricanes fans, because the quantity wise, you only got 7 picks. You didn't get the 10 last year, but I think the quality of where they got them as well in the later rounds, and even moving up to get some of them like Leiftoff, the Hurricanes once again with Darren York and the amateur scouts, overall what they did with talking with Eric Tulsky, of course, I think the Hurricanes really knocked it out of the park overall with the draft. I know I would love to do more of a deep dive with these guys, because we are not that far off from free agency, because free agency is Tuesday. We're one day away from opening a free agency. That's why we kind of had to pack a lot of our draft stuff in this episode because of the fact that you got to talk about all the guys who they picked, who could be impactful. Of course, this is like a few seasons down the road. And who should Canes fans be excited about? I think you can be excited about all 7 of these guys. 1 goalie, couple defensemen, 4 forwards, couple Swedes, an American, and all Russians. The Hurricanes did a very, very good job. I am not going to grade this because I think grading drafts right away is a tough thing to look at. I think this is where you got to look at least 3 or 4 years down the road to kind of look back at a draft. Draft grades to me right now make no sense because you don't know how these guys are going to be. So if I had to say overall, I think the Hurricanes did a great job in getting the guys that they wanted, and the quality was good with the quantity they have. And I think overall, everyone should be really excited for these guys in the coming future with where they're at, even if it's over there in Russia, if it's in Sweden, if it's in college. Who knows? It could be AHL for a couple of these guys as well. Who knows? But overall, another great draft by the Hurricanes, per usual. Having no second rounders, picking up 3 in the draft, getting another 3rd, being able to do what they did, got the guys they wanted, and now you look at 7 more faces to keep an eye on in the prospect pool that the Hurricanes have, which are always viewed as a really high prospect pool in the NHL. But I'm definitely excited for what these guys can do in the future. So let me know in the comments, who are you excited for when it comes to the players that the Hurricanes got? I'm very excited for a lot of these ones, and it should be interesting to keep track of their careers over the next few seasons. But guys, your first look podcast where there is no off season, and we'll be bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneShoeZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where you can check out my link trees in my bios to find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. I'll make sure to leave a link in the description to find my most recent draft recap over at the Hockey Writers. If you want to check out my other podcasts, it's the Searchcast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, well, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe. Hit the bell notifications so you don't miss a show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share with other Canucks to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.